We've just gone 2 minutes past 3 o'clock, so I might make a start. And thank you everyone for joining us today for this webinar on student mental health and wellbeing support. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Juanita Pope, and I'm the CEO here at VCOSS, and it's a great pleasure to be joining you all today. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are meeting on today. For me, here in the CBD of Melbourne, it's the Wurundjeri Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and I would like to pay my respects to elders and ancestors, and also to extend that acknowledgement and respect to any First Nations colleagues that we may have on the call with us today, recognising that we have just come out of a beautiful NAIDOC week where there were so many beautiful celebrations across our state of the vibrancy and the beauty of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander cultures. What a beautiful thing to do, and to celebrate and to acknowledge as well that this land was never ceded, and this always will and always will be Aboriginal land. I would also like to just note first and foremost that today's session is being live captioned and for accessibility, and a link can be found in the chat for those who need that functionality. So welcome again for joining us. We've had an incredible response to this invitation to this session. I think we've got about 160 people who have registered to join with us today, which just goes to demonstrate how very important this topic is to all of us who work with children, who are in the community sector, and who are supporting young people, families, and, as I said, children as well, right at the heart of this work. The Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system has emphasised that the school system plays an absolutely crucial role in fostering positive mental health outcomes and wellbeing for students. And in response to the Commission's recommendations, the Victorian Government has invested in a range of evidence-based initiatives to support student mental health, enhance wellbeing, and to improve student outcomes across the state. And today's webinar is really an opportunity to delve into some of those initiatives and get some insights into Australia's mental health reform landscape. So we're going to provide an overview today of what's happening in this space, and also an update on the implementation of the Department of Education's key initiatives. We'll also be providing a space for you all here today to ask questions about the suite of reforms that are currently underway. Today's session has been planned in consultation and collaboration with the Department of Education as a part of VCOSS's long-standing partnership agreement with the department. And the department, this partnership recognises that the community sector plays an incredibly important role in terms of developing policy, delivering services, and improving education outcomes for all Victorian students, and particularly those who are facing vulnerabilities or discrimination or disadvantage. So we're very grateful today for the department's time and energy in working with us to develop this webinar. Just a little bit of housekeeping before I pass over to department representatives. I think Claire Tobin is going to be up first. Today's session is being recorded and will include 3 brief presentations. So first of all, we have Claire Tobin, who's the Acting Executive Director of Wellbeing, Health and Engagement within the department, who is going to provide an overview of the reforms. Deborah Mayer then will follow together with Emily Duff. Deborah is the Acting Director of Student Mental Health, and Emily is the Mental Health and Wellbeing Leader at Sunbury Heights Primary School. So department and primary school leaders will be talking about the school's mental health fund and the school's mental health menu and in primary schools. And then finally, we'll be welcoming Kerry Ekin-Smith, who's the Director of Inclusive Education Professional Practice, who will talk about the role of mental health practitioners in schools. After those three brief presentations, as I mentioned, we will have an opportunity to go into a Q&A mode, which will be moderated by VCOSS and Department of Education staff. So we are going to be using the Q&A function today for that part of the session. So please submit your questions at any time as they come to you via that Q&A function. Please don't use the chat. We're using the Q&A function for today's interactivity. And we'll follow up on those questions later in this presentation. And for any that can't be answered today, we can follow up separately after the event. So without further ado, I would very much like to welcome Claire Tobin. Over to you, Claire, and thank you very much again for being with us today.
Oh, thanks, Juanita. I'll just check, can you hear me okay? A huge thank you to you, Juanita, and to VCOSS and your members for inviting the department to talk about our student mental health and wellbeing reforms. That's something that my team and I lead on, and both government and the department are very proud of. Today, I think we were hoping, as Juanita mentioned, to talk you through some of the key and more recent reforms to get under the tent of how implementation's going, because as you'll see as we talk through this today, we've made a significant way through implementation of some of our reforms and are still on that journey with others. We really value VCOSS's input to inform both how we've designed these reforms and also for, I suppose, to be our eyes and ears on the ground to represent back how they're being received in the community. I think you'll hear today from Deb and Kerry and Emily how these the implementation of these reforms isn't static. It's very flexible. We're learning as we're going and adjusting, and I hope that really comes through today. Juanita's already introduced the other key speakers that will be talking today. We're going to be talking about the Mental Health Funder menu, Mental Health in Primary Schools program, mental health practitioners for secondary and specialist schools, as well as our SSS services. There's so much we can talk to you about really in that space. I'm going to give a brief overview of how all of those reforms knit together with a lot of other work that's underway in our department, and then Deb, Kerry and Emily will kind of get into the detail, and we'll try and save some time for questions. I will, before we go on, of course, acknowledge, as Juanita did, that we're meeting on lands that weren't ceded. I'm in the office today. I'm at 200 Victoria Parade on Wurundjeri land, and I pay respect to their elders past and present. Any First Nations people joining us today. And yeah, it has been lovely, just as we're concluding NAIDOC week, to have had many opportunities to celebrate the culture. And I think with this work, our team is constantly drawing the connection to strong mental health and what we can learn from First Nations leaders and communities as we implement this in schools. I might, my part of the story is a little bit of the scene setting. And so it's just really wanting to, before we get into the detail, give a sense of the background, the policy context for how we've implemented these mental health reforms. And in some ways it all, well, it all hooks together through some changes that we've made recently in the Education Department to the framework for improving student outcomes. The framework for improving student outcomes, or you might have heard that described as FISO, that's what orients schools' performance and priorities and practice. So schools use FISO 2.0 as their guiding policy framework. It sets the agenda for their strategic and annual implementation planning, as well as their reporting of priorities back to the department and to their communities. In 2021, FISO was revised to place wellbeing at the centre alongside learning as a core student outcome of schooling in and of its own right, which is a really significant reform. And I think it in some ways that was influenced a bit by the Royal Commission into mental health. We also heard that from school leaders, reflecting that wellbeing is really at the core of what they do. And it builds on, I think, long-standing work that's been in place through schools, which have had a focus on supporting students' wellbeing. So having that at the centre is a real anchor point for these reforms and for schools' way of working. The other key driver that I mentioned for the reforms is the Royal Commission into Victoria's mental health system itself. The Commission handed down its report in March 2021, and that involved the Commission's report included a range of recommendations, 65 in fact, to improve Victoria's mental health system. And one of those recommendations related directly to schools, recognising that schools are a universal platform that have incredible capacity to influence children and young people's trajectory around wellbeing and to provide supports to them, in particular through a prevention and an early identification frame. So the recommendation 17 recommended that the Department of Education establish the school's mental health funded menu, as well as expand the mental health in primary schools program, which at that stage was a pilot, to 100 schools. And that sort of set us off towards the trajectory we're on right now. So government funded the school's mental health funded menu in 2021, and also committed to expanding the mental health in primary schools pilot for statewide implementation by 2026, and we're halfway there now. On top of that, we've also had funding for the mental health practitioners in secondary and specialist schools, and altogether, the menu, MIPS and MHPs, gosh, we are so good at using acronyms, and I'll just try to stop doing that for this presentation. But those three initiatives that I've just described, that represents $600 million in new investment into schools' mental health and wellbeing capacity in recent years. Now, that's by no means all we do in this space. And I just wanted to, perhaps before we hear about each of those initiatives in details, make some connection to other related reforms that contribute to students' mental health and wellbeing. This is not a prescriptive list, but there are kind of a few threads I'd like to connect to that is on this current slide. The first is that around providing the essentials for learning. And I think this is a theme that we've discussed with VCOSS many times. And I'm very confident the VCOSS members really understand very deeply how important it is for students to front up to school with the essentials in place for learning. We know that students can't learn on empty stomachs, that barriers to things like school uniforms or classes for kids, for example, really prevent students from engaging fully in learning. And that's informed a number of government's reforms in this space in recent years. So we're really pleased that School Breakfast Clubs is about to expand from 1,000 schools to all government schools who choose to opt in. In the most recent budget have had expansion for classes for kids and uniforms, the new school saving bonus, and free period products in recent years has been funded ongoing. So these are all incredibly important, I suppose, things that happen behind the scenes makes a difference for students as they're connecting to school. The other thread that I think we draw between the mental health reforms and other pieces of work is the importance of schools themselves providing a welcoming and inclusive environment. And some, but not all, of the sort of recent strategies that I will call out there is obviously respect for all relationships, and we're really pleased that funding for RR has recently been extended and expanded upon for another 4 years. Safe Schools has ongoing funding. Our Marung strategy for Aboriginal inclusion has been, sort of an incredibly important pillar of our work, and obviously disability inclusion reforms has been a huge undertaking, and those reforms continue to roll out. in all of the work that we do and all of these programs, which often are delivered universally, we also think about specific supports for priority cohort students. And some examples of those would be the Lookout program for students in out-of-home care. It's not a program as such, more a resource and support for all schools so that they can better understand what the needs are of students in out-of-home care and meet those needs. And the Navigator program is an example of how we bring in case management support for students becoming disengaged. The final thing I would touch on is that all of these reforms then build on some really foundational pieces which are built into schools in the way that they work. Obviously, we can influence wellbeing through the delivery of teaching and learning aligned with the curriculum. So our health and PE curriculum, personal and social capability are the two most relevant streams, and RR is quite a tangible example of how we support schools to bring that focus and deliver on the curriculum. We also, we're talking a lot about a lot of, I suppose, newer workforces today with a focus on mental health and wellbeing, but we have pre-existing and long-standing workforces through our Triple S service. Our primaries and secondary school nurses are both examples of area-based workforce that have been in place for a long time and supporting schools to meet students' wellbeing needs. I have probably talked a little bit too quickly. I'm going to hand over now to Deb to start getting a bit more deeper into the detail about the school's mental health funder menu. And we'll reconnect with you at the end of the presentation if you have any questions. Thanks so much, Deb.
Thanks, Claire. As Claire mentioned, the Victorian state budget in 21-22 allocated $200 million over 4 years and approximately $87 million ongoing to establish the school's mental health fund and menu, and that was in direct response to the Royal Commission's recommendation 17 that Claire mentioned earlier. As you can see on this slide, the fund was rolled out to Victorian government schools over 3 years, with rural and regional schools receiving the first tranche of funding in Term 3, 2022. And this was consistent with the Royal Commission's recommendation that schools in these areas be prioritised due to their relative disadvantage compared to metropolitan counterparts. As of Term 1, 2024, all Victorian Government primary, P-12 and secondary and specialist schools are receiving the fund. Schools receive a minimum of $25,000 every year through the fund, and there's also a 10% loading for rural and regional schools, enrolment-based funding for schools with more than 200 students, and a moderately higher per rate for primary school settings. To help schools spend their fund on evidence-based student mental health and wellbeing support, and also in line with the Royal Commission's recommendation, the department developed an evidence-based menu. So we thought we'd just give you a bit of an overview of the menu structure. So it's been designed to give schools confidence in purchasing programs, evidence-based programs, professionals and resources that will improve the mental health and wellbeing outcomes for all of their students. The menu is publicly available on the government's website, so Catholic and independent schools can also access it. It's been structured under 3 tiers of student need, has 56 purchasable programs across 13 categories, and also includes some of the department-funded resources that are universal supports for students, such as respectful relationships and school-wide positive behaviour support. Schools can also use their fund to engage staff in line with the qualifications and registrations outlined in the mental health skills checklist. The menu's 3 tiers include Tier 1, and that's the green one at the base, which is our positive mental health promotion initiatives. And these help schools to create a positive, inclusive and supportive school climate and kind of build the preconditions for optimal school learning, development and wellbeing. Tier 2, which is our orange tier, that's our early intervention and cohort-specific supports. And these complement the universal interventions, but also provide essential additional support for those students who might have specific needs or vulnerabilities. And then we move into our red section, which is Tier 3. And this is a targeted support. So these interventions are targeted to individuals or small groups of students who identify as requiring intensive, tailored mental health support to engage positively in education. You might know this, but the menu was developed in 2022 following an extensive invitation to supply procurement process that went to the open market. Offers from providers were assessed with an emphasis placed on evidence for their program's effectiveness. And this evidence was assessed externally to the department. So we engaged an expert organisation to review the evidence rating for these menu programs. The invitation, and I think you also know this, an invitation to supply process is currently underway. So providers of evidence-based student mental health programs are invited to apply for inclusion on the 2024 menu. And for probity reasons, I can't discuss the invitation to supply process in detail as it's still underway, and we can't answer any questions on it either. Just to give you a bit more detail of the menu, I thought it would be useful to show the actual categories that are included on the menu. So this slide provides the name of the category and also a bit of a descriptor and then the tier of intervention it supports. So we have 9 tier 1 categories. These include whole school approaches to positive mental health. We have social and emotional learning initiatives, programs to build mental health literacy for students and staff, eating disorder support, alcohol and drug education, bullying prevention programs, local community-led mental health interventions, and peer support programs. We have 4 categories in Tier 2. These include therapeutic programs, trauma-informed programs, disaster, grief and loss programs, and then support for diverse cohorts. And as I mentioned, those Tier 3 interventions really comprise interventions for individuals or small groups of students, and we really recommend that schools bring in professional services to deliver those interventions to their students. And we thought it would also be interesting for you to see how the fund and menu are being implemented. So we thought we'd share some case studies with you. So we selected one from a rural school, one from a metropolitan school, and another from a special development school, just to show how schools are selecting programs that best meet the needs of their students. I'm not going to read these out to you because I understand the slides will be sent to you after this. But I thought it would be, I think it's interesting just to see the different programs and how they're being used by schools. More generally with implementation, and this is also consistent with the department's policy advice, most schools are using their fund on those universal Tier 1 interventions to really kind of build mental health literacy across the school and support all of their students' mental health and wellbeing. Most Victorian schools are largely spending a little bit more of the fund on engaging staff or professionals than on purchasing menu programs. And the most common professions employed by schools using their fund are teachers and psychologists, with many schools also choosing to increase the time fraction of their mental health and wellbeing leader or mental health practitioner, which you'll hear more about in a moment. A 4-year evaluation is also currently underway to examine the design and implementation of the fund and menu. And so we're looking forward to seeing some results from that shortly. Thanks, Steve. The next initiative I'm going to speak to you about is the Mental Health in Primary Schools program. And this provides funding to all government and primary school campuses and low-fee non-government primary schools to employ a mental health and wellbeing leader. These mental health and wellbeing leaders, or MHALs as we like to call them, are VIT-registered teachers who work across the school to implement a whole school approach to mental health and wellbeing and increase the capacity of schools to support the mental health of their students. Initially developed as a pilot, as Claire mentioned earlier, in partnership with the Murdoch Children's Research Institute and the University of Melbourne, the Royal Commission encouraged the Victorian Government to expand the program should it prove effective, and highlighted that primary schools as universal services provide opportunities to identify and support children with mental health and wellbeing challenges. Based on the pilot phase, and I'll talk about those findings in a little more detail in a couple of slides, and the Royal Commission's recommendation, the Victorian Government invested $200 million over 4 years to fund all government and low-fee non-government primary schools to employ a mental health and wellbeing leader by 2026. So MIPS, which we like to call it as well, so the Mental Health in Primary Schools program, has been designed so that the implementation of each year's rollout is informed by the evaluation from the previous year. And this goes back to Claire's comment about how we're kind of implementing our reforms with an adaptive and iterative approach. And this means that we're really constantly learning and adjusting our resources and evolving the program as we learn more about how it's being implemented in our schools. The program is now in 899 school campuses, which is 49% of eligible schools. So we're kind of halfway, exactly halfway through it. As you can see on this slide, the program's operating in 9 department areas and will roll out to another 4 areas in 2025, with the final 4 areas joining in Term 1 2026. And that means that more than 1,800 campuses will be participating when implementation is complete. Broadly speaking, the mental health and wellbeing leaders in schools work to build the capacity of school staff and in particular classroom teachers to identify and support students with mental health concerns in the classroom. They support the school to create clear referral pathways within schools and externally with community services for students who require further assessment and intervention. And they also coordinate targeted mental health support for students by working with regional staff, school wellbeing and leadership teams, teachers, parents and carers, and external agencies. The jigsaw diagram that you can see on this slide outlines the roles and the responsibilities of the MHAL. And I think that it's really important to note the emphasis on the whole school approach at the Tier 1 and Tier 2 level. And the MHAL and school staff receive evidence-based training from the University of Melbourne in mental health literacy, supporting student need and building school capacity. In addition to this core training, MHALs also participate in ongoing learning communities to build their own capacity and share their experiences and learnings with other schools. MHALs in government schools are also provided with support from the Department of Education, centrally through the MIPS policy team, and also from the regional mental health branches who provide specific implementation guidance and support. Agreements with non-government sector partners are in place to provide support on the ground to those non-government schools participating in the program. So we are able to share with you some of the pilot evaluation findings from the program. And so we've outlined them on this slide. So the key findings and observations that we are sharing with you show that 77%, so a large proportion of MHAL's time is spent on those Tier 1 and Tier 2 activities, which is in line with their position description. The model was endorsed by staff and was integrated and supported within schools well. The model also increased school and staff capacity to better support student mental health and wellbeing. There was increased dialogue from staff, student and parents around mental health and wellbeing in schools, and also an increased focus and change of language around mental health and wellbeing in the classroom. Some of the enablers for success in the implementation of the program include a lot of support from school leadership and the promotion of the role within the school and the education background of the MHAL. So making sure that that MHAL is actually a teacher really enhanced buy-in with the school staff. Another thing was that the MHAL undertook professional development in mental health literacy, and they also attended all of their learning communities. Some of the barriers that we've found to implementation are the time management and workload for mental health and wellbeing leaders, particularly if they carried a dual role, which means that they were doing their MHAL role and maybe they were also the assistant principal, or they were doing a part-time teaching role as well as their MHAL role. And another barrier was understanding the challenges of undertaking the new role within the school and how the role is really an independent and self-driven one. If you'd like any more information on this report, it's actually available on our website. If you just Google mental health in primary schools, you'll be able to find a link to that report. And then I thought, we all actually thought, to make this a little bit more interesting, we thought it would be really useful for you to hear about a day or a week in the life of an MHAL. So now I'm going to hand you over to Emily Duff. Thank you.
Hi, thank you for having me. So my name's Emily Duff. I'm the mental health and wellbeing leader at Sunbury Heights Primary School. I've been in this position now for 3 years, and I'm very fortunate to be a full-time mental health and wellbeing leader at Sunbury Heights. So initially when I started this role, we spent a lot of time reviewing our policy and procedures around wellbeing, and in general all our policies, to make sure that they reflected wellbeing as a core as outlined in FISO 2.0. We then went to training staff and building staff capacity through PL to ensure that we had a collective vision and a consistent approach when dealing with mental health and wellbeing at our school, and making sure that everyone was following the correct procedures. Having done this now for 3 years, we find ourselves in a really proactive space rather than reactive. So building the staff capacity to deal with mental health issues, to recognise things, and having the supports in place has really built a level of trust within our school community, but a level of confidence with our staff as well, and our teachers, as well as our educational support staff. So from that, we've really moved to building positive climates for learning. So when we think about mental health and wellbeing, we want students to thrive in environments, and we really thought about what they need. We looked at our data, what the students were telling us. We really valued their voice and agency in all of this, and really made sure that our learning environments were meeting their needs. We really want to focus on the mental health part and all these policies and procedures and changing, and having this role, which I really believe is a missing piece in the educational puzzle, has made a significant difference to our attendance. Our attendance growth has greatly increased. We now find ourselves with students coming to school every day, and whether that be that we have plans in place, whether they be really anxious in the morning, we have transition plans, we have learning plans, we work with external therapists to align their individual education goals to what they may be with what they're working with psychologists. And then that way it's a whole care team meeting approach. We find that the parents are more proactive in communicating their students' needs or what might be happening within the family, which is really amazing, because then not only is it increasing engagement, connectedness to school, but it's also allowing us to help them navigate the external services that they may be able to reach. Building this parenting capacity and sense of trust has really helped to shape where we are with our community. I work closely with our community hub director, Sharon, and we have run some really cool external programs that have supported families. So it's really building that sense of trust again, but also looking at wellbeing not only for our students, but also as our family. And now we're finding the space where we've supported families where their siblings are coming into prep, which is pretty amazing. We've got to know them, we know their needs, and we're finding they're having a really positive start to school. One thing that's been really amazing is the cell group. So a daily timetable for me is I may run 3 cell groups per day, and these cell groups are based on students' needs. So we use our data, the observations that classroom teachers are giving us, wellbeing referrals that are being made, and I run little wellbeing groups, whether that's drum beating, African drumming to teach emotional literacy and regulation. I do cooking classes with some really anxious ASD students. We really focus on building social awareness, social skills. We have some EdConnect volunteers who come in and support that as well. So it's really great. They're ex-teachers, retirees, grandparents. So it's great to have that connectedness from the community to support student wellbeing as well. We're currently on a Berry Street training, so all staff will be conducting that. We're using our mental health fund to facilitate that training. We also use the mental health fund to employ an external counsellor, and she comes in and runs a girls group. So that happens weekly. We're focusing on our Year 6 students in preparation for high school and the transition there. We also utilise the funding to employ a play therapist. So the play therapist comes in and works with our younger students who are having challenges with social connectedness with other students, emotional regulation. But the wonderful thing with that is that it's also building parenting capacity as well. And the skills that the children are learning there is happening at home as well. And again, the siblings are getting that too. So when they come to school, it's that round robin again. For us, it's all the little things that make a difference with the mental health and wellbeing role. So it's whether I'm at the front greeting the students, they know it's a familiar face, they know the routine, and that eliminates anxiety. It's the little things of having little check-ins in the classroom. So every student has a de-escalation plan where they identify what might upset them, how their body might feel in the response. And then all this teaching comes from our respectful relationships lessons, our wellbeing lessons that are all data-driven from what the children and our data of our yard observations and classroom observations are telling us to make sure we're really meeting the needs of the students. And within that de-escalation plan, they also have what they need to calm. So not only does it give the teachers and the specialist teachers the knowledge of what each individual child might need at that time, it's also building the children's emotional literacy and the skills they need to thrive in this ever-changing world. One thing that my goal was to normalise the mental health conversations. It's okay to have a bad day. It's okay to be struggling. And it's really wonderful when, parents call up and say, Emily, I've had a horrible morning. Can I get some support with the children in the car park? And being out of the classroom and having this role, and especially having the extra skill development through the Melbourne University training, it's really built upon the knowledge and how to respond to those. Sometimes as mental health and wellbeing leaders, it's all gardens and roses, and there are days where you're confronted with some really challenging things. So the additional training and the community of practices where you can meet with other colleagues in the area to share ideas, share knowledge, external pathway referrals is really amazing in this role. I really think the mental health toolkit is very well set out. It's easy to navigate, and it's really easy for teachers mental health and wellbeing leaders to see what the teachers' needs are, what they're saying, and really implement things that our school community needs. I would like to say thank you to the department. Thank you to them for developing this phase. It's really an area of the school wellbeing that needed just an extra person, a set of hands on a daily basis. I know the office sometimes, deals with parents, so it's great to have an M hall in schools where we can then come and support the parents, whether it be for external referees, speaking to external services, and making sure that the goals that students have externally with therapists are linked into the school. So it's really a consistent approach for the students to ensure that they're thriving, because that's our goal at the end of the day. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Hi, everybody. I'm Kerry Eakin-Smith, and I'm here to talk to you today about mental health practitioners as well as student support officers. Firstly, I just want to say that run-through of your daily job, Emily, was absolutely fantastic. Who doesn't want that job? It just sounds brilliant. In terms of mental health practitioners in secondary schools, this initiative provides funding to all Victorian government secondary schools and specialist schools with secondary aged enrolments to employ a suitably qualified mental health practitioner. And that can be a mental health nurse, an occupational therapist, a psychologist, a social worker, or a counsellor of a prescribed class. The mental health practitioners provide direct counselling and support to students and other early intervention and whole school health promotion activities, and they also coordinate support for students with complex needs. Since the initiative commenced in Term 3, 2019, we've provided over 162,000 student consultations with over 23,000 individual students to date, enhanced student access to free, local and consistent mental health care support, capability building sessions for teachers and education support staff, contributing to whole school mental health and wellbeing approaches, and supporting wellbeing teams. We also now have ongoing funding for both secondary schools and specialist schools, which signifies the government's commitment to this initiative and the outcomes that it's achieving. As you can see from the slide there, full rollout was reached in Term 4 2021, which ended up being a year ahead of schedule in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. There's also a case study on the slide in the orange box. And if you're interested in finding out more about how the initiative works in schools, I encourage you to visit our mental health practitioners website. There's a number of video case studies there. Next slide, please, Stephen. Thank you. So this slide is a summary of the 6 insights on the successful implementation of the initiative. The insights are drawn from a wide range of sources, including schools, mental health practitioners themselves, as well as our regional mental health teams. The insights are being provided to our regional mental health teams so that they can support schools to consider potential improvements and to further support student mental health and wellbeing through the initiative. So the first one on the slide there is effective recruitment strategies. Schools with success in recruiting a mental health practitioner have on average used 3 recruitment strategies. And in addition to advertising the role on Recruitment Online, which is the department's advertising platform, the strategies can help the school reach a larger pool of potential mental health practitioners and also make the role more attractive to applicants. These strategies include clustering with other schools to increase the time equivalent of the mental health practitioner, or using the school's mental health fund or other school funds to increase the time of the time fraction of the MHP, considering incentive payments to attract or retain their MHP, and advertising broadly on job boards other than Recruitment Online. Another important insight is buy-in from school leadership. As we all know, school leaders set the tone for how staff operate within the school and the impact they can have. So school leaders can support their mental health practitioners' belonging and retention by intentionally welcoming and inducting them to the school, wellbeing teams, and in regional or rural areas, the wider community, so local sporting and community groups. School leadership can also strengthen the impact of MHP's work by encouraging their ongoing professional development and by facilitating their focus on prevention, promotion and staff capability, as well as the direct counselling work, which I think is a lot what Emily was talking about with working with the other staff in the school. It's really important to embed the MHP in the school. Principals and school leaders should carefully consider the best way to use the mental health practitioner within their school's health and wellbeing team structure. 2 successful models are including the MHP in the leadership team or in the wellbeing team. Regardless of which option the school chooses, it's important that the mental health practitioner is embedded in and engaged with the school's broader wellbeing team. And this integration has a fosters a shared understanding of policies and processes, attending common meetings and professional development activities, and actively participating in collaborative practices. The other important thing is setting clear MHP role priorities. They have the most impact in the school when they can provide mental health promotion and prevention and staff capability building initiatives in addition to the direct counselling work with students. And the leadership can support this by having clear expectations that enable them to focus time on these activities and consider how some of the mental health practitioners with a lower time fraction can feed into the existing mental health and wellbeing work in the school. MHPs also need time to complete continuing professional development, supervision and reflective practice. That's a vital part of their clinical registration requirements, and they do complement the role in the school, enabling them to review practices and share their knowledge of practical skills. Schools should acknowledge and prioritise this time to enable them to engage in these activities. And the final one, probably one of the most important ones, is promoting student voice. Schools and mental health practitioners should include student voice in the planning, design and delivery of whole school mental health and wellbeing activities. This ensures that the activities are relevant, cover what matters to students, and are more effective and authentic. Some of the activities mental health practitioners can do is to promote student voice and agency through a range of activities, are building their understanding of student voice and agency and leadership and the structures the school has in place, getting to know the students, building trust and familiarity with them, creating safe environments, being inclusive and flexible, and reporting back to the students on a regular basis. I think I'm running behind Steve. Okay, so the next topic is the student support services. So we call these our SSS staff. These staff are actually based in our area-based offices, and they encompass psychologists, social workers, speech pathologists, occupational therapists, and also behaviour analysts now. And their focus is to support schools and students in a range of areas of student wellbeing, learning, engagement and inclusion. They work within the 17 area teams, and they provide a multidisciplinary, holistic support for students' mental health in collaboration with other health and wellbeing workforces. They use evidence-based practice to work with priority cohorts, such as students with disabilities, mental health concerns, students in out-of-home care, and students already in or at risk of entering the youth justice system. They all have specialised expertise to support implementation of major reforms, such as our mental health and disability inclusion reforms, and to build school capability in these areas. Recent principal feedback indicates that they're increasingly satisfied with the support that SSS provide, and this feedback is used to plan and improve services for our most vulnerable students to ensure a consistent, equitable and high quality service. And one of the other things is the team that implements mental health practitioners and student support services, they're quite joined up as well. So we are creating really good pathways for students that need additional support. Might go on to the next slide. So thanks, Stephen. Okay, so this one is about the SSS priorities. As always, there's a limited amount of number of staff in these positions, so they work in priority areas across our system. So a school will submit a referral to an area, and then the area will allocate allied health professionals based on that referral. As you can see on the slide, the 4 priorities are listed there. And the main supports that they do provide relates, specifically to mental health and wellbeing. They frequently provide mental health supports in priority 1 requests for support to schools and individual students. Often this is following a critical incident or a complex case relating to emotional trauma, extreme challenging behaviour or serious mental health issues. And they provide both direct intervention as well as capability building for school staff to support a particular student.
Thank you, Kerry and Deb and Emily. Actually, now we're ready to take any questions that you have, and I'm not sure, Juanita might be moderating those. We're ready for questions, Anita, with the time we've got left.
Thanks, Claire. And can I just check, because I can just see you on the screen, Claire, can you see me?
I can see you, and maybe Kerry, Emily and Deb also want to turn their cameras on for this bit, and we'll sort of take the questions between us as they come.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, everyone. Okay, so we have had a few questions come through on the Q&A. So thank you for those who have already submitted your questions. And thanks to all the speakers we've had so far. Really interesting to get those insights into what's happening right now, and very much keen to continue the conversation with these questions now. The first question that I've got here is, how does the school-focused youth service fit with the mental health reforms?
I can probably take that one, Juanita. We're not talking about, well, they fit in a range of complementary ways, I would say. So the mental health reforms obviously are particularly focused on mental health. We would sort of see that school-focused youth services look at a range of drivers and try to respond to a range of drivers to student disengagement, mental health being one of them. So that in terms of the Venn diagram of supports that school-focused youth service provide, there is some overlap with mental health. The mental health reforms are more, I suppose, specifically focused on mental health, and school focus would have a broader remit on how to support the drivers of student engagement more broadly. There were so many things that we could have spoken about today, but we've just we heard from members that they were keen on speaking about these newer mental health reforms, and that's why we're focused the session on those today.
Thank you. Yeah, no, there's lots of interconnectedness, isn't there, between these various parts of the reform system. So thank you. And the second question I've got here is a kind of an observation that we're not hearing directly from young people today on this webinar. How does this suite of reforms embed student voice and lived experience?
I'll start this one also, and look, in a range of ways. Probably practically it's a little bit harder to have students in front of you, but please be reassured in today's session, but please be reassured that student voice has been very strong and something that we've listened to deeply and continue to. During design, we've had a student mental health, like students have been around the table on our mental health reform reference group. We've really valued the support that's come through VCOSS and our rural and regional youth ambassadors. They've been really critical in helping us design the mental health reforms as well as a reference point through implementation. I think Emily gave a really great example of how at a school level, student voice practically is informing how schools, what they pick off the menu, the sort of supports they need. Like, student voice is really strong, and that's something that is built in also to the design. And it was great, Emily, to sort of hear that coming across in practice today through your examples. We're also thinking about student voice through our evaluation. So hearing directly from students is really important for us, so that we're learning as we go and adjusting, as Deb mentioned. It's not so static. So we are thinking about students at each stage of these reforms.
Thanks very much, Claire. The next question I have is from someone who I imagine is in a regional area of Victoria, and they ask, what supports are in place to support rural and remote schools to recruit qualified mental health practitioners? Is that you again, Claire?
I reckon this is Kerry would be the best person to answer this one.
Fantastic.
Do you want me to go
Kerry.
first, Claire? So we do have acknowledged that it is difficult to recruit, well, statewide, but particularly in rural and regional. And quite often what we do is encourage schools to cluster together to increase the time fraction of the practitioner that they're looking to recruit. And we have an alternative funding agreement so that we can look outside of that direct workforce, look at partnering with community organisations or other health organisations in those towns. And we're also looking at sort of exploring some alternatives. I know we have, which Claire can maybe talk to a little bit more, we've got our partnership with Headspace, which sort of assists where we do have some of those service gaps. But it would be fair to say that attraction and retention is one of our priorities in that upcoming year to work on, so that we do get some really great workforces, especially those qualified ones in the rural regional areas. Claire, did you have anything to add?
No, I think I think you've covered it well. I don't have anything else to add. Thanks, Kerry.
Thanks, Kerry. And yes, it's a common refrain across the community sector around workforce challenges, and particularly acute in remote and rural settings. So something we're thinking about a lot here too, as are many, I'm sure, on the call today. The next question is, will the role of the mental health and wellbeing leader in primary schools be solely directed to that work, or will that be in conjunction with performing a classroom teacher role?
Why don't you jump in on this one, Deb? Because we've obviously heard from Emily, we're lucky to have a whole time fraction, but that's not the only way that we implement MIPS.
Yep.
So do you want to talk a little bit how the funding perhaps dictates?
No worries. Yes.
Thanks, Deb.
So most schools will receive funding for a part-time equivalent. So 3 days a week or 2.5 days a week. And as we mentioned before, they can top that up if they want to recruit more. So you can either employ your mental health and wellbeing leader just for that part-time fraction, or they can also have classroom duties as well. And that's one of the challenges, I guess, that I mentioned earlier with our implementation that we're looking at, that we need to make sure that if they are a classroom teacher with classroom teaching responsibilities, they still have sufficient time to undertake their mental health and wellbeing leader role.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I think we've probably got time to squeeze one more question in. We do have quite a few still on the list, so apologies in advance for those whose questions we have not got to today on this session, but we will endeavour to get back to you through written materials or other follow-ups. So the next question, or the final question, is: we all know the power of working together for children and their families. How does the mental health and wellbeing leader support communication and coordination of supports with students and families?
Emily, do you want to talk a little bit about how your role provides that
Sure.
sort of intersection? I think you gave some nice examples at the start, and then we can.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So when we have a student working with a number of external services, we always like to establish a care team meeting where we bring all those services together and we focus on the student holistically, and making sure that we're all on the same page. Not only does that support the families where it's not overwhelming for everything and all the different services, but we also have a collective approach to the students' mental health and wellbeing. As a school, we like to prioritise what their wellbeing goals are and in their individual education plans or learning plans, and communicate that with the therapists. And then, like I said, it's that really collective, holistic approach where everyone's the same vision and the same goal to ensure that the students' needs are being met.
Thanks, Emily. And you did provide some great examples, and it's so great to have your perspectives on this call today. So I think that probably is all we've got time for in this session. And I'd just like to again thank you all for coming, in particular to our presenters, Claire, Deb, Emily and Kerry. Thank you all for sharing your wisdom, insights and information about these reforms with us all. We just a couple of closing remarks. Again, a reminder that the session has been recorded, so we can make it available to those who weren't able to attend today. And responses to questions taken on notice or questions that we didn't get back to, we will endeavour to respond to when we distribute materials to you all after today's session. So look out for that follow-up correspondence from us by email. And finally, have a wonderful afternoon, everyone, and thank you again for joining us today.
SSS teams also provide these supports in collaboration with other mental health or health and wellbeing workforces to provide a wraparound holistic service for the student and school. And they also link at-risk students with supports both within the department and the community as appropriate. And I think I'm now handing back to you, Claire.